She conquered 37 worlds without mercy. But when Captain Jake kept challenging her instead of begging for humanity's survival, Queen Viralyn did something she'd never done before. She hesitated. Captain Jake Rodriguez had been dreaming of this moment his entire life. After 15 years in space exploration, he finally commanded his own research ship, the Starwalker. The crew of 12 had been traveling for 3 months, searching for new worlds in the outer reaches of space where no human had ever been before. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the stars through the big window. His coffee was getting cold, but he didn't care. They had just discovered something amazing, a solar system with 7 planets, and one of them looked like it might support life. The excitement in the air was thick. Everyone was talking at once, checking their computers and making plans for the landing mission. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Tech Officer Lisa Park from her station. Her voice had changed from excitement to worry in just a few seconds. Jake walked over to her screen and felt his heart skip a beat. There was a ship out there. But this wasn't like any ship humans had ever built. It was massive, at least 10 times bigger than their research vessel. The design was smooth and curved, looking almost like it was grown instead of built. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that seemed to have meaning, like some kind of language made of light. "How long has it been there?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice calm even though his hands were shaking slightly. "It just appeared, sir. 1 second our sensors showed empty space, and the next second, this thing was just there, like it came out of nowhere." Jake had trained for first contact situations, but seeing it happen for real was completely different. This was history in the making. Humans were about to meet another intelligent species for the first time ever. He took a deep breath and walked back to his captain's chair. "Open all communication channels," he ordered. "Let's try to say hello." The crew worked quickly, sending out radio signals, light patterns, and mathematical sequences. Anything that might show peaceful intentions. They waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then everything went wrong. A bright blue beam shot out from the alien ship and wrapped around the Starwalker like a giant hand. Jake felt the ship shake and heard the engines struggling against some invisible force. Warning. Alarms started going off everywhere. "We're caught in some kind of tractor beam," Lisa shouted over the noise. "I can't break us free. Whatever technology they're using, it's way beyond anything we have." Jake grabbed the communication system. "This is Captain Jake Rodriguez of the Earth ship Starwalker. We come in peace. Please release our vessel." He repeated the message several times, but there was still no answer from the alien ship. The Starwalker was being pulled closer and closer to the massive alien vessel. Jake could see details now. Strange markings on the hull, openings that might be docking bays, and those pulsing lights that seemed to be getting brighter as they approached. "Captain, what are your orders?" asked Security Chief Tom Wilson, his hand moving toward the weapons controls. Jake knew their small research ship's weapons would be useless against something this large and advanced. "Stand down, Tom. We don't want to give them any reason to think we're hostile." The alien ship had a docking bay that opened like a flower blooming. The Starwalker was pulled inside, and Jake watched through the window as the opening closed behind them, sealing them inside. The lights in the docking bay were strange, not harsh like human ship lights, but soft and warm, almost welcoming. "Life support is stable in here," reported Lisa. "The atmosphere is breathable, but there's something in the air that our sensors can't identify." Before Jake could respond, things started happening fast. Shapes moved in the shadows of the docking bays, tall, graceful figures that seemed to glide instead of walk. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. Even from a distance, Jake could see they moved with purpose and intelligence. "Sir, they're doing something to our systems," Lisa said, her fingers flying over her controls. "I'm losing control of ship functions one by one. It's like they're learning our technology just by touching it." Jake felt helpless as he watched his crew try to maintain control of their own ship. One by one, his people started reporting strange feelings. Dizziness, confusion, like something was pressing against their minds. "Captain," whispered Communications Officer Dave Chen, his face pale. "I think they're inside our heads. I can feel something. Someone looking through my memories." That's when Jake saw his crew members starting to collapse. Not violently, but peacefully, like they were just falling asleep. Lisa was the last one still conscious besides himself, and she looked at him with fear in her eyes before she too slumped over her controls. Jake was alone. The doors of his ship opened with a soft hiss, and he knew there was no point in trying to fight. He stepped out onto the alien docking bay floor, his legs shaky but determined to face whatever was coming with dignity. The beings that approached him were beautiful in a way that made his breath catch. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Their features were elegant, almost perfect, but their eyes held an intelligence that was ancient and powerful. They moved like dancers, surrounding him, without making him feel threatened. They led him through corridors that curved and flowed like they were inside some living creature. The walls pulsed gently with soft light, and Jake realized this wasn't just a ship. It was something alive, or at least partly alive. Finally, they brought him to a massive chamber that took his breath away. It was like being inside a cathedral, made of crystal and light. And there, on a throne that seemed to grow out of the floor itself, sat the most incredible being Jake had ever seen. She was clearly their queen or leader. Like the others, she was tall and elegant, but there was something more, and presence that filled the entire room. Her skin had a pearl-like quality that shifted colors as she moved, and her hair flowed around her like it was underwater. But it was her eyes that captured him, deep, knowing eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. She stood up and walked toward him, and Jake noticed she moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own power. When she spoke, her voice was like music, and somehow he understood every word even though she wasn't speaking English. "Welcome, human," she said, and Jake felt the words in his mind as much as he heard them. "I am Queen Viralyn of the Veltar. You have traveled far from your small world to find us." Jake tried to speak but found his throat dry. Finally, he managed, "What have you done with my crew?" The Queen's expression didn't change, but Jake caught something. Was it amusement? In her ancient eyes. "They are safe. They are helping us understand your species. Do not worry, they feel no distress." "Understand us for what?" Jake demanded, finding his voice and his courage. "What do you want with humans?" And then it happened. Queen Viralyn smiled. It wasn't cruel or threatening, but it wasn't entirely kind either. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't, someone who was several steps ahead in a game you didn't even know you were playing. "You will learn, human. You have been chosen for something very special. Your people's future, whether they have one at all, will depend on how well you perform in the days to come." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he stood straighter. "And if I refuse?" The Queen's smile grew wider, and for the first time since he'd been captured, Jake felt truly afraid. Not because she looked dangerous, but because she looked pleased. "Oh, but you won't refuse," she said softly. "Humans are so predictable in their defiance. It will be fascinating to see how long you maintain this brave attitude." Before Jake could respond, the Queen gestured to her guards. "Take him to the observation chambers. Make sure he is comfortable. We want him at his best for what's coming." As they led him away, Jake looked back over his shoulder. Queen Viralyn was still watching him, still wearing that mysterious smile. And somehow, he got the feeling that his refusal to be intimidated had only made her more interested in whatever she had planned. Jake woke up in what looked like the most luxurious prison cell he'd ever seen. The walls were smooth and curved, made of some kind of crystal that glowed softly with warm light. There was a comfortable bed, a table with food that actually smelled good, and even what looked like a bathroom area. But when he walked toward what he thought was a door, his hand hit an invisible barrier that sent gentle tingles up his arm. He was trapped, but in the strangest way possible. The most unsettling part wasn't the invisible wall, it was what lay beyond it. Through the transparent barrier, he could see directly into Queen Viralyn's chambers. She was there now, sitting at a desk that seemed to be made of flowing water frozen in time, reading something on a device he didn't recognize. Every few minutes she would look up and watch him, those ancient eyes studying his every move. Jake felt like an animal in a zoo, except the visitor was an alien queen who seemed fascinated by everything he did. When he paced back and forth, she watched. When he examined the walls looking for weak spots, she leaned forward with interest. When he tried to break the barrier by hitting it with a chair, that mysterious smile appeared on her face again. "This is insane," Jake muttered to himself, running his hands through his hair. He'd been awake for what felt like hours, and she was still watching him like he was the most interesting thing in the universe. As if she heard his thoughts, Queen Vera Lynn stood up and walked to the barrier. Up close, Jake could see details he'd missed before. The way her skin seemed to have tiny stars moving beneath the surface, how her hair moved like it had a life of its own, and those eyes that held intelligence older than human civilization. "You slept for exactly 7 hours and 23 minutes, she said, her voice somehow passing through the barrier even though nothing else could. "Most species sleep longer when they're stressed. Interesting." "What do you want with me?" Jake demanded, standing as close to the barrier as he could get. "Where's my crew? What are you planning to do with Earth?" Queen Vera Lynn tilted her head, studying him like a scientist looking at a new specimen. "So many questions. Humans are remarkably curious creatures. Tell me, Captain Jake Rodriguez, what do you think makes your species special?" "I'm not playing your games," Jake shot back. "I want answers." That smile again. Wider this time, like she was genuinely delighted by his refusal to cooperate. "But you are already playing, whether you realize it or not. Everything you do, every word you speak, every time you refuse to answer my questions, it's all part of the evaluation." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Evaluation for what? The Queen walked to a section of her wall that suddenly became transparent, showing Jake a view of space he'd never seen before. Dozens of planets hung in the distance, each one glowing with the lights of civilization. "My people, the Veltar, have existed for over 50,000 of your Earth years," she said, gesturing to the planets. "We have encountered 247 different intelligent species. Of those, 189 have joined our empire willingly. 37 chose to fight and were removed. 21 proved to be incompatible with our civilization and no longer exist." Jake's blood ran cold. "And the humans? That depends entirely on you, Captain. You see, I don't simply conquer worlds. Any primitive species can do that. I study them first. I learn what makes them unique, what they can contribute to our empire, and whether they deserve to continue existing." She turned back to him, and Jake saw something in her expression he hadn't expected. Boredom. Ancient, deep boredom. Like someone who had seen the same movie thousands of times and was desperately hoping for something new. "Most species follow predictable patterns," she continued. "They either submit immediately out of fear, or they rage and fight until they're destroyed. Both responses are tedious, but humans—" She paused, studying Jake's face. "Humans might be different." Before Jake could respond, a section of the floor in his chamber began to glow, and suddenly a holographic projection appeared in the air between them. It showed Earth, his beautiful blue home planet hanging in space. "Let's begin with something simple," Queen Vera Lynn said. "I'm going to show you scenarios involving your world and your people. You will tell me what you think the correct response would be." The hologram changed, showing what looked like a massive space station approaching Earth. Scenario 1. An unknown alien force approaches your planet with technology far beyond your own. Your world's leaders have 3 choices: surrender immediately and hope for mercy, launch a full military assault despite being outmatched, or attempt to negotiate. What should they choose? Jake stared at the projection, his mind racing. This felt like a test, but what was the right answer? What did she want to hear? "I need more information," he said finally. "What are the aliens' intentions? Have they tried to communicate? What are they asking for?" Queen Vera Lynn's eyebrows raised slightly. "Most species choose an answer immediately based on emotion. You want more data. Fascinating." The hologram shifted, showing different scenes. Cities under attack, peaceful first contact scenarios, diplomatic meetings. The aliens haven't communicated their intentions clearly. Their ships are in attack formation, but they haven't fired. They're simply waiting. Jake thought carefully. Every instinct told him this was important, that his answer might determine humanity's fate. Then we try to communicate first. We show peaceful intentions but prepare for defense. We don't surrender without trying to understand what they want, but we don't attack first either. We try to find a middle path. That smile again, but this time it seemed different, almost approving. Interesting choice, the Queen said. Most warrior species would attack immediately. Most peaceful species would surrender right away. You chose uncertainty over simple solutions. The hologram disappeared, but immediately another scenario appeared. This one showed a human colony on a distant planet, facing some kind of natural disaster. Scenario 2. A human colony of 10,000 people is facing destruction from a massive storm. You have ships that can evacuate 8,000 people. How do you choose who lives and who dies? Jake felt sick to his stomach. That's impossible. No one should have to make that choice. But someone must, Queen Virulin said, leaning forward with interest. Resources are limited. Time is running out. What do you do? We find another way, Jake said firmly. We work harder, think smarter, use every ship. We have multiple trips, call for help from other colonies. We don't just accept that 2,000 people have to die, even if it means risking all 10,000 lives by waiting too long. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the hologram of people running from the approaching storm. Yes, because the alternative is giving up on them without trying everything possible first. Queen Virulin stood up and walked closer to the barrier, her expression unreadable. You would risk total failure rather than accept partial success. Would risk everything rather than abandon people who were counting on me. For the first time since he'd met her, the Queen's smile seemed genuine rather than mysterious. Your species continues to surprise me, Captain. Most civilizations become practical about such things. They learn to accept necessary losses. Maybe that's why most civilizations disappoint you, Jake said, meeting her gaze directly. Maybe being practical isn't always the same as being right. The Queen was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with those ancient eyes. Finally, she spoke. Tomorrow we will continue your evaluation. These scenarios will become more complex. I suggest you rest. You'll need your strength. As she turned to leave, Jake called out, Wait, you still haven't told me what happened to my crew. Queen Virulin paused at the entrance to her private chambers. They are contributing to our understanding of humanity, in their own way. Sleep well, Captain. Tomorrow's test will be much more challenging. As the lights in her chambers dimmed, Jake was left alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he wasn't just fighting for his own life. He was fighting for the future of every human being who had ever lived. And somehow, every time he refused to give the easy answer, every time he chose the harder path, Queen Virulin seemed more interested in keeping humans alive. But what did that mean for the test to come? Jake had been in his crystal prison for 5 days now, and he was starting to understand the pattern. Every morning, Queen Virulin would present him with impossible scenarios. Every time he refused to give simple answers, every time he chose the difficult path over the easy one, she would smile. But it wasn't just any smile. Jake was beginning to recognize the subtle differences. Sometimes it was the smile of a teacher whose student had just grasped a difficult concept. Sometimes it was the smile of someone who had found an unexpected treasure. And sometimes, like yesterday when he'd refused to sacrifice a small group to save a larger one, it was the smile of someone who was genuinely surprised. Today felt different, though. Queen Virulin hadn't started with her usual tests. Instead, she was sitting in what looked like meditation. Her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. Jake found himself watching her just as intently as she usually watched him. When she finally opened her eyes, she caught him staring. For a moment, neither of them looked away. You're studying me now, she said, and there was something almost amused in her voice. What conclusions have you reached, Captain? Jake had been thinking about this for days. You're bored, he said, finally. You've been doing this for so long that most species don't surprise you anymore, but humans do, and you can't figure out why. Queen Viralyn stood up slowly, gracefully, and walked to the barrier between them. And what else? You're lonely, Jake said, the realization hitting him as he spoke. All that power, all those conquered worlds, but you're completely alone. When was the last time someone challenged you? Really challenged you, not just with weapons, but with ideas? The Queen's expression didn't change, but Jake noticed her hands had clenched slightly at her sides. He was getting close to something important. You want to know what I think? Jake continued, standing up to face her directly through the invisible barrier. I think you're hoping humans will surprise you again. I think you're hoping we'll be the species that doesn't fit your patterns. And if you're wrong? Queen Viralyn asked softly, if humans prove to be just like all the others in the end? Jake met her gaze steadily. Then you'll be disappointed again, and you'll add us to your list of conquered or destroyed species. But you'll still be alone. Something shifted in the Queen's expression. Just for a moment, Jake saw past the ancient wisdom and eternal confidence to something vulnerable underneath. Tell me about your species, she said suddenly, settling back into her chair but keeping her attention focused, entirely on Jake. Not the facts I can learn from your computers or the memories I can take from your crew. Tell me what it means to be human. Jake was surprised by the question. What do you want to know? Everything, she said, and for the first time Jake heard genuine curiosity in her voice rather than clinical interest. Start with why you became an explorer. Why leave your safe home planet to travel into dangerous unknown space? Jake thought about it for a moment. Because staying safe isn't really living. Humans have this need to discover, to explore, to push, beyond what we know, even when it's dangerous, even when it makes no logical sense. The Veltar value logic and efficiency above all else, Queen Viralyn said. We expand because it increases our power and resources. But humans explore for what? Knowledge that might not be useful? We explore because there might be something wonderful out there, Jake said. New worlds, new life, new ideas, maybe something that will make us better than we are. Even knowing you might find something hostile? Something that could destroy you? Jake nodded. The possibility of finding something amazing is worth the risk of finding something terrible. That's just who we are. Queen Viralyn was quiet for a long moment. In 3 centuries of rule, I have never met a species that actively sought out danger for the possibility of wonder. Is that good or bad for humanity's evaluation? Jake asked. That smile again, but this time Jake was sure he understood it. It was the smile of someone who had just found exactly what they'd been looking for, without realizing they were searching. Tell me about human relationships, she said, instead of answering his question. Your species forms bonds that seem to serve no practical purpose. Friendship, love, loyalty to those who cannot benefit you. Why? Jake found himself thinking about his crew, his friends back on Earth, the woman he'd been planning to propose, to when he returned from this mission. Because life isn't just about surviving or being powerful. It's about connection, about meaning, about having people who matter to you, and knowing that you matter to them. Even when those connections make you vulnerable, even when caring about others forces you to make illogical choices, especially then, Jake said firmly, the connections that cost us something are the ones that mean the most. Queen Viralyn stood up and began pacing, something Jake had never seen her do before. She seemed agitated, restless. My species reproduces rarely, she said suddenly. We form partnerships only when we encounter beings of exceptional quality, those we consider true equals. In my 3 centuries, I have never found such a being. Jake felt a chill of understanding. Is that what this is really about? You're not just evaluating humanity as a species. You're looking for something personal. The Queen stopped pacing and looked directly at him through the barrier. I have conquered 37 worlds, Captain. I have the power to reshape entire solar systems. I can extend my life for thousands of years. But I have never experienced what you humans call love. I have never had someone choose to stay with me rather than submit to my power. And you think a human might be different? I think you already are different, she said softly. For 5 days you have had every opportunity to tell me what you think I want to hear. You could try to manipulate me, flatter me, appeal to my ego. Instead, you continue to challenge me, to push back, to treat me as an equal even though I hold your species' fate in my hands. Jake felt his heart racing as he began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The smile, he said. Every time I resist, every time I refuse to give you the easy answer, you smile because you are treating me like a person worth arguing with rather than a power to be feared or worshipped, Queen Viralyn finished. Do you understand what you have done, Captain? In 5 days, you have shown me more genuine respect than I have received in 3 centuries of rule. They stood there looking at each other through the barrier, and Jake realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about humanity's survival anymore. This was about 2 people from completely different worlds who had found an unexpected connection. What happens now? Jake asked. Now comes the real test, Queen Viralyn said, and her smile was sad and hopeful at the same time. Soon, my superiors will demand my final judgment on humanity, and I will have to choose between my duty to my empire and something I never expected to find. What's that? She placed her hand against the barrier, and Jake found himself placing his hand against it from the other side, their palms separated by just a few inches of invisible energy. The first being in 3 centuries who makes me want to be more than just a conqueror, she said quietly. The first being who makes me remember what it feels like to hope. As the lights dimmed that night, Jake lay awake thinking about the impossible situation they were both in. Queen Viralyn wasn't just an alien captor anymore. She was someone who had been powerful and alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it meant to have an equal. And somehow his refusal to be intimidated by her had awakened something in her that she thought was gone forever. But what did that mean for humanity? And what did it mean for both of them? Jake woke up to find Queen Viralyn standing much closer to the barrier than usual, her face pressed almost against the invisible wall. Her usually perfect appearance was different today. Her hair seemed less controlled, her glowing skin had a nervous shimmer to it, and those ancient eyes held something Jake had never seen before. Uncertainty. The evaluation period ends today, she said without any greeting, her voice tighter than he'd ever heard it. My superiors are demanding my final report on humanity within the next few hours. Jake sat up quickly, suddenly fully awake. And what are you going to tell them? Queen Viralyn turned away from him and began pacing again, her movements less graceful than usual. That is the problem, Captain. In 3 centuries of conducting these evaluations, I have never been conflicted about my decision. Conflicted? How? She stopped pacing and faced him again. Your species is remarkable. In just 1 week, you have shown me qualities I didn't know existed. Your adaptability, your creativity, your refusal to accept simple solutions to complex problems. These things make humans valuable beyond measure to our empire. Jake felt a moment of hope, but something in her expression told him there was more to the story. But there's a problem, she continued, her voice becoming softer, more personal. The problem is you, Jake Rodriguez. Me? What did I do wrong? You did everything right, she said, and Jake was shocked to hear what sounded like pain in her voice. You treated me like a person instead of a goddess. You challenged my ideas instead of simply agreeing. You made me remember what it feels like to have a conversation with someone who sees me as an equal. Jake stood up and walked to the barrier, studying her face. I still don't understand the problem. Queen Viralyn laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. The Veltar have a tradition, Captain. When we find a being we consider truly exceptional, someone worthy of being our equal, we offer them a choice. They can join us as partners in ruling the empire, sharing power and immortality. Jake's heart started beating faster. And I realized 3 days ago that I want to make that offer to you. She looked directly into his eyes. Not because of your species, but because of who you are as an individual. You have awakened something in me that I thought was impossible. For the first time in my existence, I understand what humans call love." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at her through the barrier, seeing the vulnerability in her expression, the hope and fear mixed together. "But if I make that offer," she continued, "it would mean taking you away from your species forever. It would mean keeping you here while I still have to make a decision about the fate of humanity. And I realize now that I don't trust my own judgment anymore." "Why not?" "Because I want to spare your species partly for the right reasons. They truly are remarkable and would make valuable additions to our empire. But also partly for the wrong reasons. Because I want you to be happy, and I know that seeing your people destroyed would hurt you." Jake felt his mind racing. "So you're afraid you might save humanity just to make me happy? Or condemn them because keeping them alive would mean constant reminders of the choice you had to make?" she said quietly. "Either way, my personal feelings, for you are affecting a decision that should be based purely on what's best for the Empire." They stood there in silence for a long moment, both struggling with the impossible situation. "There's something else," Queen Viralyn said finally. "Something about my species that I haven't told you." "What?" "When we form these deep connections, these partnerships, they change us biologically. The bond becomes permanent. Once formed, we cannot survive long without our chosen partner. It's not just love, Jake, it becomes a physical necessity." Jake felt cold understanding wash over him. "So if I said yes to your offer, you would be bound to me for eternity, yes. But I would also be bound to you. I would lose the ability to make cold, rational decisions about conquered species. I would become vulnerable in ways that could threaten everything my people have built. And if you said no?" Queen Viralyn's hands pressed against the barrier, and Jake could see them trembling slightly. "Then I would have to find the strength to evaluate humanity without considering my feelings for you. I would have to ignore the fact that my decision affects someone I care about." Jake moved closer to the barrier, placing his own hands against it opposite hers. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to help me make the right choice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't even know what that is anymore. Every option seems wrong in some way." Jake looked into her eyes and saw someone who had carried the weight of impossible decisions for centuries. Someone who had never before had to consider what her choices meant to another person she cared about. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything. Before you met me, before all this happened, what would you have decided about humanity based purely on what you learned about us?" Queen Viralyn was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I would have recommended acceptance into the Empire," she said finally. "Your species shows unique potential. You have qualities we lack and could learn from. You would make us stronger." "Then, that's still the right answer," Jake said. "The fact that you care about me doesn't change what's true about humanity. But it changes my motivations for the decision. Does it matter why you make the right choice, as long as you make it?" She looked at him with surprise. "You would have me save your species even knowing it might be for selfish reasons?" "I would have you save my species because they deserve to live," Jake said firmly. "Whether you do it because they're valuable to your empire, or because you want me to be happy doesn't change the fact that it's the right thing to do." Queen Viralyn stepped back from the barrier, studying him with that familiar expression of someone seeing something unexpected. "Even now, faced with this impossible situation, you find a way to surprise me," she said. "Most beings would try to manipulate my feelings to guarantee their species' survival." "I'm not trying to manipulate you," Jake said. "I'm trying to help you see that caring about someone doesn't automatically make your decisions wrong. Maybe it makes them more right." "How?" "Because now you're not just thinking about power and efficiency. You're thinking about what your choices mean to real people. That's not a weakness. That's wisdom." Queen Viralyn walked to the window showing the view of space where her superior's ships were waiting for her decision. "They're coming for my report in 1 hour," she said. "Whatever I decide about humanity, whatever I decide about us, it has to be now." Jake watched her staring out at the stars, knowing that the next hour would determine not just the fate of his species, but the course of both their lives. "I have something to tell you too," he said quietly. She turned back to him, waiting. "I've been thinking about your offer, about what it would mean to stay here with you. And the truth is, part of me wants to say yes. Not because I'm afraid of what happens to Earth, but because I've never met anyone like you either." Queen Viralin's eyes widened slightly. "But I can't make that choice while my people's fate is undecided," Jake continued. "I can't think about personal happiness while billions of lives hang in the balance. And after? If I save humanity? If they're safe?" Jake met her gaze steadily. "Then we'll have time to figure out what comes next. Together." For the first time in days, Queen Virilin smiled that genuine smile, the one that had nothing to do with tests or evaluations. "Together," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." The hour passed faster than Jake had ever experienced. Queen Virilin spent most of it in silent meditation, preparing for what might be the most important conversation of her long life. Jake watched her, understanding that she was gathering the courage to possibly defy everything she had known for 3 centuries. When the communication system activated, filling the chamber with a sound like distant thunder, Jake felt his heart stop. 3 massive faces appeared in holographic projection, other Veltar leaders, their expressions cold and ancient beyond imagination. "Queen Virilin," spoke the center figure, whose voice carried the weight of millennia. "Your evaluation period has concluded. What is your judgment on the species called humans?" Queen Virilin stood slowly, transforming back into the regal, powerful ruler Jake had first met. But he could see the slight tremor in her hands, the uncertainty she was trying so hard to hide. "Honored Council," she began, her voice steady. "Despite her inner turmoil, humanity presents a unique case in our long history of species evaluation." "Explain," commanded the leader. "They possess qualities we have not encountered before. Their adaptability exceeds even our own. Their creativity leads them to solutions we would never consider. Most importantly, they have shown the ability to choose difficult moral paths over simple practical ones." The council members exchanged glances. "And your recommendation?" Jake held his breath, knowing that the next words would determine everything. "I recommend—" Queen Virilin paused, looking directly at Jake through the barrier. In that moment, he saw her make her final choice. "I recommend that humanity be offered something we have never offered any species before. Not conquest, not absorption into our empire, but true partnership." The silence that followed was deafening. "Partnership?" The lead council member's voice was sharp with surprise. "Explain this unprecedented suggestion." Queen Virilin straightened, and Jake could see her finding her strength in the decision she'd made. "For 3 centuries I have conquered and absorbed species into our empire. But humans have shown me something I didn't know was possible. They have the ability to change us for the better." "This is highly irregular," another council member interjected. "We do not change. We improve others." "And that," Queen Virilin said with growing confidence, "is exactly why we need them. They have challenged my thinking in ways no species ever has. They have shown me new approaches to problems I thought were solved. Most importantly, they have demonstrated that strength and compassion are not opposing forces." Jake watched as the Queen walked closer to his barrier, drawing strength from his presence. "I propose that we establish Earth as our first allied world, not a conquered territory. Let them maintain their independence while we share knowledge and resources. Let us learn from them as they learn from us." The council was quiet for a long moment. Finally, the leader spoke. "Queen Virilin, in 3 centuries of service, you have never made an error in judgment. But this proposal suggests a fundamental change in our approach to expansion. What has influenced this recommendation?" This was the moment Jake had been dreading. Would she tell them about her personal feelings? Would she have to choose between honesty and humanity's survival? Queen Virilin looked directly at the council members. "My judgment has been influenced by spending extensive time observing and interacting with their representative. Through this process, I have learned that Some forms of strength can only be gained through voluntary cooperation, not dominance. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. Jake felt a surge of admiration for how carefully she had chosen her words. "You speak of cooperation," the leader said, "but you have not addressed the security concerns. A species that remains independent could eventually challenge our authority. A species that is forced into submission will always seek rebellion," Queen Viralyn replied. "But a species that chooses alliance will fight to protect what we have built together. Humans have shown remarkable loyalty to those who treat them with respect." Jake watched the council members conferring among themselves in their ancient language. Finally, they turned their attention back to Queen Viralyn. "Your proposal is unprecedented," the leader said. "It will require unanimous council approval and extensive deliberation. In the meantime, what do you recommend we do with the human representative?" Queen Viralyn's hand moved to the barrier control panel. "I recommend that we demonstrate our good faith by treating Captain Jake Rodriguez as what he truly is, humanity's first ambassador to our people." Before the council could respond, she deactivated the barrier. Jake felt the invisible wall disappear and found himself standing in the same space as Queen Viralyn for the first time since his capture. The moment felt electric, charged with possibility and hope. "If the council approves my recommendation," she continued, "Ambassador Rodriguez will return to Earth to help establish formal relations between our species. If the council rejects it—" She looked at Jake, and he could see the determination in her eyes. "Then I will resign my position and ensure that humanity is given safe passage back to their home system." The council members looked genuinely shocked. "You would abandon your duties for this species?" "I would honor a higher duty," Queen Viralyn said firmly. "The duty to do what is right, not just what is powerful." The lead council member studied both of them for a long moment. "We will deliberate and provide our decision within one standard cycle. Until then, the human will remain in your custody." The holograms disappeared, leaving Jake and Queen Viralyn alone together without a barrier between them for the first time. "That was incredibly brave," Jake said, hardly believing he could speak to her face to face. "That was incredibly terrifying," she replied, but she was smiling. "I have never directly challenged the council's traditional approaches before. Do you think they'll approve your proposal?" "I honestly don't know. But I realized something during that conversation. I no longer care more about their approval than I do about doing what's right." Jake looked at her with new understanding. "You've changed." "We both have," she said softly. "The question now is what happens next." 3 days later, the council's decision arrived. Jake stood beside Queen Viralyn as the holographic projections reappeared. "After extensive deliberation," the leader announced, "the council has decided to approve your unprecedented recommendation. Earth will be offered status as our first allied world, not a conquered territory." Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. His people were safe. "However," the leader continued, "this new approach will require careful monitoring. You will personally oversee the establishment of relations with humanity. Should this alliance prove problematic, the responsibility will be yours alone." "I understand and accept those terms," Queen Viralyn replied. "Very well. Begin preparations for the ambassador's return to Earth. Formal negotiations will commence once their leaders have been informed of our decision." When the council's images disappeared, Jake turned to find Queen Viralyn watching him with that familiar smile. But this time, he understood it completely. It was the smile of someone who had taken a tremendous risk and found it worthwhile. "So," she said, "it seems you're going home, Ambassador Rodriguez." "It seems I am," he replied, "but I have a feeling this isn't goodbye." "Not goodbye," she agreed, stepping closer to him. "This is the beginning of something entirely new. A partnership between species, yes, but also something between us," Jake finished. 6 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of a new kind of ship, one built with both human and Veltar technology, designed for exploration and peaceful contact with other species. Queen Viralyn stood beside him. No longer just a conqueror, but a partner in building something the galaxy had never seen before. "Ready for our first joint mission, Ambassador?" she asked, that same smile playing across her lips. Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about how everything had started with what seemed like humanity's darkest moment. "Ready, Your Majesty, though I have to ask, what happens if I resist your suggestions about where we should explore first?" Queen Vera Lynn's smile widened, becoming something full of warmth and shared understanding. "Then I'll know I chose the right partner for this new adventure." As their ship moved toward unexplored space, Jake realized that sometimes the greatest victories came not from fighting or surrendering, but from finding ways to build something better together. And sometimes, the most mysterious smile was simply the expression of someone who had found exactly what they'd been searching for all along.